with all of these awful things happening in the world today, and all awful things that have happened previously, why on earth would any of us choose to read horror or watch horror, experience horror? Alright, hello and welcome. My name is Tom Levine. I'm an award-winning author with 9 novels originally published with imprints of Random House, Simon & Schuster, and a couple of other New York publishers. I also have my own imprints that I'm working on right now. I've also written for the comic book series Spawn and some fiction for the Battletech tabletop role-playing game. And this is Stephen King's Danse Macabre. We are in section 3 of An Invitation to Dance. Here, King is going back to his story about sitting in a movie theater when he was a kid watching the Flying Saucer Invasion, I believe it was called. Let me double check. Well, you have not gotten... Oh, sorry. Earth versus the Flying Saucers. He's in a theater watching Earth versus the Flying Saucers when all of a sudden the movie stops, the lights come up. Here we go. We sat there in our seats like dummies, staring at the manager. He looked nervous and sallow, or perhaps that was only the footlights. We sat wondering what sort of catastrophe could have caused him to stop the movie just as it was reaching that apotheosis of all Saturday matinee shows, the good part. And the way his voice trembled when he spoke did not add to anyone's sense of well-being. "I want to tell you," he said in that trembly voice. Let's pause here. What do you think he's going to announce? Any ideas? Because my natural instinct, and I'm sure a lot of people's natural instinct, would be to say, oh, the JFK assassination, right? Except it's the wrong year. So that is not what he's about to say. This is the thing that is going to terrify young Stephen King and his friends while watching Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Back to the book. "I want to tell you," he said in that trembly voice, "that the Russians have put a space satellite into orbit around the Earth. They call it Sputnik." This piece of intelligence was greeted by absolute tomb-like silence. We just sat there, a theater full of 1950s kids with crew cuts, wiffle cuts, ponytails, ducktails, crinolines, chinos, jeans with cuffs, Captain Midnight rings, kids who had just discovered Chuck Berry and Little Richard on New York's one black rhythm and blues station, which we could get at night, wavering in and out like a powerful language from a distant planet. We were the kids who grew up on Captain Video and Terry and the Pirates. We were the kids who had seen Combat Casey kick the teeth out of the North Koreans without number in the comic books. We were the kids who saw Richard Carlson catch thousands of dirty commie spies in I Led 3 Lives. We were the kids who had ponied up a quarter apiece to watch Hugh Marlowe in Earth versus the Flying Saucers and got this piece of upsetting news as a kind of nasty bonus. I remember this very clearly. Cutting through that awful dead silence came one shrill voice, whether that of a boy or a girl I do not know, a voice that was near tears, but that was also full of a frightening anger. "Oh, go show the movie, you liar!" The manager did not even look toward the place from which that voice had come, and that was somehow the worst thing of all. Somehow that proved it. The Russians had beaten us into space. Somewhere over our heads, beeping triumphantly, was an electronic ball which had been launched and constructed behind the Iron Curtain. Neither Captain Midnight nor Richard Carlson, who also starred in Riders to the Stars, and oh boy, the bitter irony in that, had been able to stop it. It was up there, and they called it Sputnik. The manager stood there for a moment longer, looking out at us as if he wished he had something else to say, but could not think what it might be. Then he walked off, and pretty soon the movie started up again. Section 4. So here's a question. You remember where you were when President Kennedy was assassinated. You remember where you were when you heard that RFK had taken a dive in some hotel kitchen as the result of another crazy. Maybe you even remember where you were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you remember where you were when the Russians launched Sputnik 1? Terror, what Hunter Thompson calls fear and loathing, often arises from a pervasive sense of disestablishment, that things are in the unmaking. If that sense of unmaking is sudden and seems personal, if it hits you around the heart, then it lodges in the memory as a complete set. Just the fact that almost everyone remembers where he/she was at the instant he/she heard the news of the Kennedy assassination is something I find almost as interesting as the fact that one nerd with a mail-order gun was able to change the entire course of world history in just 14 seconds or so. That moment of knowledge and the 3-day spasm of stunned grief which followed it is perhaps the closest any people in history has come to a total period of mass consciousness and mass empathy and, in retrospect, mass memory. 200 million people in a living freeze. Love cannot achieve that sort of across the board hammer strike of emotion, apparently. More is the pity. Let's stop there. So, as you can tell, and this is why, Stephen, if you're out there, this is why we need a new updated version of Dance Macabre, because I don't even know where to start. Okay, my father is still alive. This is 2024. He was born in 1933. So, in his lifetime, the things he has been alive for are stunningly portentous. The Kennedy assassination, of course, Cuban Missile Crisis, World War II, uh, Vietnam, the assassinate so many assassinations, right? And then of course 9/11, big one. I would point to Columbine. These are things that had the same impact as what King is talking about here. This mass consciousness where the world, basically, for most humanity, freezes in a moment and is experienced all at once. The difference is, of course, when Sputnik was launched, for example, or when Kennedy was shot, we weren't all carrying cell phones. We weren't all watching it happen on live television. That has changed things. And that has brought an undercurrent of terror to everyday life. These awful, horrific things, to say nothing of the pandemic that we just quote unquote came out of. If we are in fact out of it, I don't even know. I remember talking to a guy, this is several years ago now, who at the time was in his, I think mid 20s, late 20s, and realizing that he had seen or was aware of 9/11 in like fourth, fifth, or sixth grade, seeing it happen on television, much like my generation watched the Challenger explode. And we thought nothing could be worse than that, even as we were still, talking about the Cold War and our seemingly inevitable nuclear annihilation. This is how we fucking grew up. And now my kids, for certain, are coming up in a world. I mean, my kids grew up, are still growing up during a pandemic where they were locked in a house for 2 years, where I was driving, a few blocks away with my mask and my gloves and my everything and getting food for us that was being handed out by the schools so that our kids could eat breakfast and all this kind of shit. I mean, it was just fucking madness. We still carry, though, these scars. For me and someone my age, Columbine in particular, because we didn't know what was happening, and much like law enforcement, we thought it was a hostage situation, and it turns out it wasn't. And the avalanche of violence that has been triggered by that one event is stunning. And the fact that we're still fucking dealing with it, fucking, what is this, 25 years later, I think now? It's unholy. That's the only word that I can think of. It's fucking unholy. So we have this collective memory and consciousness of these terrible things happening. And unlike the 1950s, it's being served to us in real time on social media platforms, on 24-hour news networks. We cannot escape it. So then, what is the function of horror in books and movies? Because horror hasn't gone anywhere. It started, I mean, when do you want to say it started? Right? There's all kinds of arguments. I've made the argument previously on this very podcast that I think horror stories started with the advent of language. Once human beings became human beings, however many hundreds of thousands of years ago, horror, I think, was a natural part of our storytelling lexicon. Probably for the same reason that fairy tales and children's stories, if you can believe it, were filled with, wolves eating grandmothers and children being eaten by witches and this, pick any grim fairy tale that you want or any Hans Christian Andersen story. These are horrific stories made for children to do what? Well, in that time and place, one argument is that they were made and told to inure them to Death. Kids, get ready. It's coming. Hopefully it won't be a wolf, but it might be. So brace yourself, right? And now we don't tell those stories as much. I'm not saying we should necessarily bring them back. I'm just commenting on the fact that I haven't read those stories to my kids. Not by, you know, because I've elected not to. It just hasn't happened. There's Pete the Cat. Why would I not choose Pete the Cat? But horror has been with us at least that long, is my argument. And while there are peaks and valleys in its overall general, I would say, Western society, while it has had peaks and valleys in Western literature for sure, it's never gone away. It's never been completely disregarded. There will always be a pocket of people, readers and viewers, who really, really enjoy it. Now, on that note, there's a spectrum of those who enjoy it. Some people are just out for the body horror and they want the gore and all that kind of stuff, and good for them. Terrifier 3, etc. I have not seen the Terrifier movies. I have no desire to see the Terrifier movies because I've heard enough about them to know that I will not enjoy them. I will probably get physically ill if I try. So, not going to watch that. Crazy thing is, if this was, 1985 and I was 11 years old and it was on HBO at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would be there in a heartbeat. No question. As a kid, I would absolutely have watched those movies. Wouldn't have hesitated. Wouldn't have bothered me, probably. Now I just can't. I don't know if it's being a parent. I don't know if it's just being old or what, but I can't handle those kinds of movies. But then there are other horror movies that I do still like. I like stuff, what's one of my favorite horror movies of relatively recent times. It's probably 10 or more years old now, but is a movie called Hell House LLC. It's a found footage movie. Those are really hard to do well. They're cheap to make, and so people make them all the fucking time. I wouldn't hesitate to make one myself. In fact, I actually made a short film that was a found footage film that I think we won second place in a film festival, if I'm not mistaken. We should have won first, but I think we won second. So nothing against the found footage filmmakers, but Hell House LLC is one of my favorites. It was genuinely frightening to me, genuinely engaging. The characters were fun to watch, and it was just fucking scary without being gory. And so that's one of my favorites. I think I need to rewatch that one again. And there are others, but I still like watching horror movies, but I'm on a spectrum of I don't really need a lot of gore anymore. Okay. The question still remains, though, why? With all of these awful things happening in the world today, and all the awful things that have happened previously, why on earth would any of us choose to read horror or watch horror, experience horror? I don't know. I just work here. The thing about horror is it remains, like all genres of fiction, an escape. And that is priceless. Anything that can viscerally grab you and pull you out from the horrors of the real world, I think should be celebrated and should be enjoyed. Now, in my opinion, I choose horror and I choose contemporary young adult literature or whatever. Cool. Other people choose quote unquote trashy romance novels. Great. Some people read epic fantasy or political thrillers or domestic suspense or cozy mysteries. Take your pick. Whatever your favorite category, your long tail keyword happens to be, great. At the end of the day, it is an escape, and that is to be enjoyed and savored, and we should appreciate those people who do that creation. I've seen many people online, and they are absolutely right about this, point out that the people who continuously attack the arts, right? The arts aren't a viable career, and we need to not fund the arts with federal money. Schools need to get rid of the arts. We don't have the money for the arts. It's a waste of time. We need STEM. That's all we should do. Engineering, math, science, blah, blah, blah. Great. You know what? I'm all in favor of STEM, 100%. Let's go make sure that's happening. But every person who thinks that, every person who stakes out that territory, needs to ask themselves and needs to report publicly what they did with themselves when they were locked in their house for 2 years during a pandemic. What did you watch? What did you listen to? What did you read? You know who made all that stuff for you? You know who made it possible to get through those awful years? Fucking artists, creators. So maybe back off and give them a break and support them. There's a possibility. Anyway, little bit of a soapbox there, but I'm just in kind of one of those moods. We didn't get very far in Dance Macabre, but then again, we usually don't. So we'll come back again next week and see where the world takes us. All right. In the meantime, whatever you like, whatever you enjoy, go enjoy it. Dude, just if you're into comic books, read comic books. If you like choose your own adventure books like I've still got from the 80s, read those. Don't give a shit. Don't let anybody tell you what you can and can't read or can and can't watch. Go enjoy your stuff. If it brings you peace and joy and a break and escape, do it. And if you've got a couple extra seconds, go find the creators and look them up on your socials and tag them and say, hey, thank you. This got me through a tough time, because that can make all the difference. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.